Hi there, and welcome to another episode of the Future of Jewish podcast. I'm your host, Joshua Hoffman. On this episode, I am joined by Dov Lipman. He is the founder and CEO of Yad L'Olim, an organization that serves as a voice in the Israeli government for new immigrants from all backgrounds. In 2004, he immigrated from the U.S. to Israel with his wife and 4 children, and in 2013, he was elected to the 19th Knesset, making him the first U.S.-born MK in 30 years. Enjoy my conversation with Dov Lipman. Dov, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me today. You and I actually connected a few years ago with regard to Izzy, and you've now since started a fabulous organization, which I know we'll get into. But first, before we get into what you're working on today, give us a peek behind the curtain of where you came from and all the good stuff that led to where you are today.
Sure, and thank you so much for having me on. So I grew up in Silver Spring, Maryland, lifelong Baltimore Orioles, Washington Redskins, then Washington Bullets, Washington Capitals. 2 of the teams have changed names since then because there's a lot of political correctness going around. But grew up in Maryland, real American in every possible way. Came to Israel for 2 years after high school, then went back to yeshiva and to university. Met my wife, we settled down in Maryland, and ended up being inspired to make Aliyah in 2004 with 4 children. And my background's in education. I'm not a politician. I was loving teaching. I love writing. And there were events that took place in the city where we live called Beit Shemesh, which led me into community life and then political life. It dealt with internal issues amongst the Jewish people. Most people, when they think about Israel and the challenges that Israel has, they think about security and they think about economy. And this was a real question of the Jewish people inside of Israel, the tensions between religious and secular, more extreme elements. And that's what brought me into community life and ultimately got me into politics in Israel, because I really do feel very, very passionately that this is the greatest threat to Israel's future. It's not all the security issues. It's not what everybody reads about in the international headlines, but it's what kind of a people we're going to be like from within, and being able to live in tolerance and coexistence with one another in the Jewish state. So that's what drew me to politics. That's what brought me to Yesh Atid, to Yair Lapid's party, which was not my natural political home for sure. And I was blessed to be part of a process that led me to be elected in the Knesset in 2013 to the 19th Knesset. Had the incredible privilege of serving Israel, Olim, Jews around the world as a member of Knesset. And then since then, I've been trying to use the platform as a former member of Knesset to try to do good things, whether it's Israel education around the world, speaking to delegations all the time that come to Israel, traveling around the world to make the case for Israel, and also certainly helping Olim. And all of these efforts are just a tremendous blessing to be involved with. I always say, to be part of the process of the Jewish people building a Jewish state in the 21st century is just absolutely remarkable. So that was a very few sentences, just capturing a very long journey that got me to where I am today.
I love it. I love it. Wow, a lot to unpack there. I want to go back to what you said about this sort of core predicament, which is not the security issue or even economic issues, but really this sort of internal struggle. And I've actually been thinking about this for a long time. I've never really heard somebody else talk about it in such a way. And I'm just curious if we could go into some more of the thinking behind that sort of sentiment, because I think it's very interesting and very on point.
Absolutely. So the starting point is actually all of our classic sources, which are very, very clear. And they say that we were exiled and the temple was destroyed, not because of the strength of the Roman legions 2,000 years ago, but it says it was because we couldn't get along with each other from within. There's an amazing power that comes when we're unified and able to function together as a people. And once we lose that, then our enemies that always seek to destroy us are able to really come in and make that happen. So if you look at the history of Israel so far, our army, and I would obviously, with my religious background, I put God behind this as well. We were able to deal with all the external threats that come our way. I mean, you look at the miraculous victories that have taken place, starting with 1948 to 1967, to regaining our strength from the Yom Kippur War after it looked like we were on the verge of destruction, and then just moving forward and seeing where we are with all of the threats that are against us. We've really shown our ability to deal with national security issues, and I have full faith that we'll deal with whatever comes our way on that front. Israel has weathered horrific economic situations and collapses and functioned in a time when people had no ability to make a livelihood, and somehow always found its way to reinvent itself and just find a new avenue. And now certainly it's a startup nation. We economically, there's things to improve, but we'll be okay. But this core question of what does it mean to be a Jewish and a democratic state is one which we've never really confronted. We've very much punted on it. We've said, we don't want to deal with it. That's, by the way, why Israel doesn't have a constitution, because there is no separation of church and state in Israel. We want to have a Jewish state, but how do you balance Jewish and democratic? And, we have Jews coming back to Israel from 2,000 years of experiences all around the world, different cultural experiences, religious experiences, national experiences, and they all have a different idea of what that Jewish state should look like, or at the very least, how they live their lives is very different than other people around them. So what does it mean that it's a Jewish state? And then how do you balance Jewish and democratic issues such as what should the Shabbat look like in a Jewish state? Right, so the Sabbath, the day of rest. So my way of observing it is I follow the Orthodox understanding of halacha, and I don't drive, and it's a day very much focused on prayer and spirituality and family. There are people in Israel who don't observe the Shabbat the way I do, and this is their one day off a week from work where they want to visit their grandmother or go to the beach or whatever they want to do. And we have to try to find a contract between these populations to determine what does Jewish and democratic mean, or else we're just going to rip each other apart as these tensions grow because we're not dealing with this issue. The same applies to marriage in Israel. The same applies to the draft to the army. These are all very core issues, and there's many more that relate to religion and state, which we really haven't found a way to address. That's what drew me to the Knesset originally, especially to Yesh Atid, because the concept was, we don't all agree about security issues, that was for sure. We don't agree about religion and state issues, but let's sit together around a table, religious and secular together, and try to find compromise and understanding. And I believe that is the first step towards that process, is everyone saying, we have to solve this. We can't just let it keep going and let people en masse be very turned off from Judaism in Israel, which is horrible. I don't mean Jewish religious practice. I mean just not feeling like they're proud Jews in a Jewish state. That's terrible. People questioning, why are we here? Why is it worth it? Why? I'll just live somewhere else. Why do I have to be in a Jewish state? So I really believe that goes to the core of who we are as a people, because our army is only going to be as strong as the passion that people have for Israel. Our ability to withstand all of the economic struggles, which I think a country like Israel will always have, given where it's located and some of the dynamics here. It's only going to be, we can only withstand it if we believe in being here for a purpose. So this goes to the core of what it means to be a Jewish state and in a democracy in the Middle East. And I do believe that if we continue to rip each other apart and move further and further away from each other, that is what can weaken us to have the ultimate downfall. And it's not going to come from any of the other areas. So that's why I articulate it that way. It does relate, by the way, also to the relationship of Israel with diaspora Jewry, with global Jewry, where there's a lot of friction on that point as well. And I certainly believe that Israel has to be the nation state for all the Jewish people, wherever they live. And obviously there's a deeper discussion of what that should mean. But as people feel polarized from Israel and they feel distant and they feel like disengaging from Israel, that's a problem. That's a strategic problem for the Jewish state, that Jews feel that way. So that gives you a little bit of a sense of why I believe this is such a pressing issue, which I believe is the most important issue that Israel needs to address.
Wow, just beautifully articulated. And I guess my next question just naturally is, so like, where do we go from here? I mean, I think what you're describing and what I'm also experiencing in Israel is clearly a polarization of groups of people moving in opposite directions. I still think security by and large feels like a common point, more or less, in Israel, although not as much as maybe it used to be. And so I guess, as somebody who served in the Knesset, now somebody who's working directly with the government, with this new organization, I understand the concept of finding common ground, but at the same time, like, what are the practicalities, or as we would say in Hebrew, what's the tachlis?
Right. So there are practical solutions that are on the table, and it's a question of leaders being courageous enough to go with those decisions. But I'm gonna backtrack for a moment because I think I'm gonna surprise you with my answer. I believe that when you try to address some of the issues of religion and state head on, it just leads to all sides to kind of dig in their heels, and we're not going to move from it. And it actually it leads us to erupt in greater strife between the populations. One of the things that I feel is holding us back from progress on these issues is the power of the ultra-Orthodox parties in the Knesset. And I want to be clear. They live in Israel. It's a democracy. They have a right to vote. When I travel around the world and I hear non-Orthodox streams, complaining about the power that the ultra-Orthodox have, I do tell them, it's everyone's right to move to Israel and have a vote. And, in theory, if 1 million non-Orthodox Jews picked up a Eid Aliyah tomorrow, that would change the whole dynamic of the democracy in Israel. It's a really important point to make because they have a democratic right to vote. They're living in Israel, and we have a process here which gives them the power that they have. It's not unfair. It's just the reality of the demographics. So it's a very important point to make. But having said that, I do feel, I believe for a while, that I'm going to give you the proof that it works, that as ultra-Orthodox integrate into Israeli society, I don't mean becoming less religious, but they become part of society around them. They're aware of some of the challenges in society. They become more moderate when it comes to the religion and state issues. And I've really felt that way. So obviously I want to help the ultra-Orthodox enter Israeli society because I want them to have a livelihood and I want them to be able to take care of their families with dignity. And I really mean that. And seeing people impoverished, there's no reason for a huge population to be impoverished. So people often say, well, there's no hope for religion and state because the ultra-Orthodox population is having an average of 7 children per family. The rest of Israel is about 3 children per family. So their political power presumably would just continue growing, and there's no possible way to have a breakthrough on the religion and state issues. But they're making a mistake because if you look election after election, the ultra-Orthodox population is not growing in its political power, despite the fact that its population is. The polls always now have Shas at around 8 seats, 9 seats, United Torah Judaism about 7 seats. That shouldn't make sense if you're analyzing this. Every election we have, there's more of them that are turning 18 than there are the rest of Israel, so why isn't it growing? And the answer is because younger ultra-Orthodox generation that's getting opportunity, that are going to work, that are going to the army, they're going to university. They're not looking for what the old guard has been telling them to look for. And therefore, as time goes on, there is going to be an opportunity, even politically, for a breakthrough and for change. And the biggest proof to that is the city of Beit Shemesh, where I live. A few years ago, a woman came to me. Her name is Eliza Bloch. She's from the religious Zionist community, PhD. She was the principal of the large secular high school in Beit Shemesh. And she said she wants to run for election as mayor. Can I support her? And because I'm the big political expert, I said, you have no chance, but I'll support you. How could she possibly win? Beit Shemesh is a majority ultra-Orthodox population, and there was an incumbent ultra-Orthodox mayor who all the rabbis were going to say everyone should vote for. How could she have a chance? And this woman worked day and night and traveled around Beit Shemesh and presented her vision for the city. And there we were on election night. I was literally crying as she won with about 5,000 votes from the ultra-Orthodox and another 4,000 ultra-Orthodox who didn't show up to vote. That was their way of kind of letting her win. And how did that happen? Doesn't make any sense. It's because that's the generation that's working, that's going to school, and they just said, we're going to vote for the best person for mayor and not base it on these population-based decisions that we're being told to make. So I do believe that we're going to have a breakthrough politically on these issues, and we can find compromise, but that's going to happen as the ultra-Orthodox become part of Israeli society. The political power will be less. They won't be the kingmakers in a coalition. And then we can say we can have compromise. There are so many ideas that you could come up with about Shabbat, about marriage, about all these issues that are reasonable. They make sense. Yes, it requires compromise from both sides. And the extremists on both the religious and the secular side are not happy about those ideas. But there's this middle 80% that are not extreme that'll say, you know what? That's pragmatic. These are the courageous decisions we have to make to run a Jewish state. And that's the way I believe we'll get to moving forward.
Wow. So first question, and I'm going to come back to it because I don't want to put you on the spot, is have you thought about running for prime minister? But we're going to come back to that in a second.
Okay.
And first I want to ask you about You're coming from a place where clearly you're representing the Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox communities, and it feels like in a very respectful and dignified way, you're trying to make the case for communities such as those, which are often attacked, just to put it bluntly, by people that look like me, secular, Americans moving to Israel, or Americans that are Jewish that don't move here but want to have a say in what happens here. I think that the secular folks, or sort of the non-Orthodox Jews, both in Israel and also abroad, just as the Orthodox have to do a better job of, as you call it, assimilating into society, we have to do a better job of understanding your plight and your issues and your challenges and your goals and your passions and so on and so forth. And one of the things that I'm trying to accomplish with this podcast is to have people like yourself, and I've had a few other Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox on the podcast before this, to say, like, look, we're also people. We also, like you said, we want to live with dignity, and I'm trying to get sort of the non-Orthodox community to be more empathetic and compassionate about sort of the communities that you represent. And I'm just curious, like, to me, that's where all this has to come together. Like you say, that middle 80%, because if we can more easily understand each other, we don't have to agree on how to live each other's lives. And some of us might want to live in Beit Shemesh, and some of us might want to live in Tel Aviv, and some of us might want to live in the diaspora. But I feel like with like the social media and the echo chambers and all these, sort of reinforcing cycles that actually just make us, as you said, like more entrenched, like digging our feet in more into the ground. On the secular side, like, what do we have to do better? Not just what does your group have to do? That's what I'm curious about, because to me, it's a two-way street.
Sure. There is so much I have to say about this topic, and I can literally keep you here for hours about it. I'm trying to make order in my head of a few things that I want to say. The first thing is, I'll never forget when I was first exploring getting involved in Yesh Atid, my first conversation with Yair Lapid, who, by the time people are listening to this podcast, might be the Prime Minister of Israel. I had a thought a few minutes into the first conversation, and I said to myself, it's really sad that I've been living in Israel about 7 years at that point, and this is the first time that I, as someone who was religious, was sitting and having a conversation of substance with someone who was very secular about what do we want here. Like, we're not even having the conversation. Like you said, we're all in our own worlds, complaining about what we're complaining about. And here I was, I'm actually sitting with a guy for the first time, and we're talking about it, and we're trying to see, is there a way for us to come to understanding? And that realization was, on the one hand, thrilling that I'm actually part of that process, but it was also devastating because I realized how separate we are. During the election campaign, I'll never forget, one of the members of Knesset in our party in the first time we got elected was Yael German. Yael was the mayor of Herzliya. She became the health minister. And we were sitting one time and she said, Dov, let's have a conversation. She really wanted to understand where the yeshiva world was coming from, where the ultra-Orthodox are coming from. Why do they want to study so much Torah for so many years and even be poor in the process? And I thought that was such a mature, courageous step. Here we are, we're going to be dealing with legislation about these issues. Let me understand who they are. But I also flipped it. And I said to her, tell me what it means to be totally secular in Israel. Like, what does Israel mean to you? I can't get into your mind, right? I know what Israel means to me. I'm coming from a religious place. I believe that it's promised to us by God. I believe, I believe all the stories that happened with Abraham. It's where are you coming from on this? And it was so helpful for me just to hear where she was coming from as well. So the starting point is, yes, we have to be having these conversations. We have to be willing to talk to each other. And I believe a tremendous amount can be accomplished by doing so. When I talk to people about this topic, my starting point, and this might surprise some of your listeners, your audience right now, but Zionism, or the return to Israel, right, didn't begin with Theodor Herzl 120 years ago. But in the late 18th century, the students of the Vilna Gaon and the Baal Shem Tov, who were the great spiritual leaders in Europe, sent their students to Israel, not to build a state, not to build an agricultural society, but they were supposed to be the spiritual emissaries of global Jewry in the Holy Land. And they came here and they studied and they prayed. They started out in Tzfat and Tiberias and then Jerusalem. And they were supported by global Jewry. There was a system called the Chalukah. They were supported by them. And then all of a sudden, secular Zionism started coming in. And for these people, it shook them to the core. They were living these very spiritual, kind of isolated lives here. And now all of a sudden, Jews are coming in who obviously have very different lifestyles and different goals than they had. And their response was very much to circle the wagons and say, we can't have anything at all to do with this, because they were so scared and threatened by what secular Zionism meant. And, leaders who I revere for founding the state of Israel, but didn't necessarily believe in God. They didn't put God in Declaration of Independence, certainly wanted to see kind of a new Judaism in Israel that was shedding the old observant style of Europe, which meant persecution to them. Understanding that bit of history is so critical if you want to try to reach change, because they're not bad people who are selfish, obnoxious, whatever terminologies people want to call them. They're just people who are following their tradition, following the rabbinic leadership that always said that we have to choose what they view as holiness over what they view as secular lack of holiness. And this is the way they've responded to it. But there's a process that's taking place. And they're starting to realize, wait a minute, it could be that in the 18th century, in the 19th century, even the beginning of the 20th century, the right thing to do was to close the doors and we won't have anything to do with that population. But now they're starting to realize that there is an avenue for cooperation. We can do both. You can be ultra-Orthodox and serve in the army today. You can be ultra-Orthodox and go to work. You can be ultra-Orthodox and go to university. And that process is happening. So secular Israel and broader Jewry has to respect that process, not attack, but respect it, embrace it, invest in it. A lot of federations all around America are putting money into employment programs for the ultra-Orthodox. That's brilliant. I'm not fighting you. I'm giving you opportunity. And that's a remarkable way of addressing the overall problem. And I'll get to one more point on the secular side, because I've had this fight. I'm sitting right now talking to you in a Knesset committee room. I've had these fights in this building. You have to open up special units in the army for the ultra-Orthodox. And you have to say to them, we are going to do our best to make sure that you won't have exposure to females in a way that's uncomfortable for you. You have to open up special programs in universities for them, which will be separate, men and women. You can't say to them, on the one hand, we want you to come to the army or university. On the other hand, along the way, we're going to trample on everything which is dear to you. You just can't do that. And there are people in the secular world who fight that. And they say, no, you can't hold women back in the army. I say back to them, I'm not holding women back in the army. Let women accomplish whatever they want. But in these specific units, let's be sensitive. I'm not holding female professors back in universities. But for this class, offer a class for male ultra-Orthodox young men with a male teacher. We have to come and meet them and understand where they're coming from. And in that way, secular, broader Israel can play a very, very important role in this process, which is happening anyway. Just facilitate it and just embrace it.
So I want to go back to my question about prime minister, because everything you're saying right now, it's like, we're about to have another election. And if you were running for prime minister, I mean, I think I would vote for you. Have you seriously thought, or I know it's a sensitive subject, but what can you tell us about any thoughts you've had about running for prime minister of Israel?
Okay, so I'll jump to prime minister first, and then I'll talk about politics in general. Prime minister of Israel is a job that I could never, ever see myself wanting to have, because the position itself is basically spending all day and night trying to keep your coalition together. First, to make a coalition, which is promising people things and wheeling and dealing, and it's just not my nature to be that way. To have to day and night just be holding this together. Again, it's really, people don't understand it. By the way, Bennett has talked about how he got very caught up. This is him talking, not me. I'm not here to criticize him. He got very caught up in the diplomacy and the security and everything else. And along the way, he neglected his coalition and his own party. And that balancing act is very, very difficult to play. So that's not something that I aspire towards at all. However, if you're talking about being involved in policy and trying to drive change in Israel from a policy level, that's something which I very much do believe in. One of the reasons why I started Yad L'Olim, the organization that I run, is because it enables me to be in the Knesset, being a voice for Olim and their families and Jews all around the world, in the Knesset and in the government. And I'm in daily meetings with ministers, their staff, members of Knesset. I'm in committees, but I could do it without having to be involved in politics. So right now, I don't have to spend the next 4 months trying to get reelected. I don't have to go to a political debate and get into a clash with good friends of mine. I'll tell you a quick story which captures this. In the 2015 election campaign, I'm sitting next to Michael Oren at an election debate. Michael and I became very good friends. I was in Knesset when he was ambassador to the United States, and we're both Olim from America. We both had to give up our American citizenship to have the positions that we had, and we just have a lot in common. And I certainly looked up to him very, very much in terms of who he has been and what he has meant to Israel. And in 2015, I was running for the Knesset with Yesh Atid, and he was running for the Knesset with Kulanu. And we're sitting next to each other in a debate, and I spoke first. And then Michael leans over me. He says, Dov, I'm really, really sorry that I have to do this. And he goes up to the podium and he just trashes me. Not me personally, but everything I said. And then he sat down afterwards. He said, I'm really, really sorry again. Like, I can't believe I had to do this. Politics is really difficult for good old nice Americans. It's really difficult. I don't want to be spending day and night arguing with people, and a lot of it's in front of the cameras. And certainly as prime minister, you have to stand there and go at it with the opposition. It's just not something that I want to spend my time or my energy on. So at the moment, as long as I can help make change in the country and in policy, both in terms of Aliyah, but I haven't given up all the work that I'm doing with the ultra-Orthodox as well. We have ultra-Orthodox programs of integration into the employment world and the workforce. There's a lot going on beyond Yad L'Olim. I'll continue doing that without having to be in the muck and the kind of mudslinging of politics. That's the very clear answer in terms of my immediate intentions. And thank God, Yad L'Olim is blessed to have tremendous support from people all around the world who we've helped and recognize the need for it. Just today, I was in the Knesset committee about the crazy lines at Ben Gurion Airport. And it's a major, major issue for people, for traveling Olim, their families, Jews around the world. And they were all talking about possible solutions. And I waited quietly for my turn to speak. And I said, just want you all to know that I have lists of hundreds of Olim who are turning to us for employment. So if you're short 1,000 people in the airport, in the workforce in the airport, let's sit together and let's find these Olim jobs in the airport, and we'll solve so many problems at once. And now, as a result, we have a meeting set up with the Mankal, with the Director General of the airport, and with a few other people that work there. And we're going to try to literally address the issue of the lines by getting Olim jobs in the airport. This is an example of you can really make change and really be in a position to make a difference, but without having to be in politics. So the short answer to your question is no, I have no plans at the moment of running for Prime Minister of Israel.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Wow, that was amazing. Well, I really admire your answer. Very nuanced and sophisticated in drawing that very clear difference between policy and politics. I'm curious, I think last year in 2021, the most amount of Americans made Aliyah since I believe the 1970s. And, potentially this will change. I know there's now different programs that are trying to bring, more Jews to Israel to work in high tech, because there's been a ton of money that's gone into high tech in Israel, some more job creation. And I'm just curious, you don't often hear about somebody truly representing the Olim Chadashim, the new immigrants moving to Israel. And what a lot of people don't realize, and correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that you're an Oleh Chadash or Oleh Chadasha for 10 years in the eyes of the government, which is a long time, So take us into, you gave us an example of some of the meetings you've been in, but what's the vibe and the feelings around new immigrants to Israel? Is it still very much a land of immigrants, or do you now feel that sort of the Israelis born and bred have settled in and now it's becoming sort of a conflict? Like, what are the things that you're seeing on a day-to-day basis?
Sure. There's this interesting line that you hear sometimes in the Knesset that as you talk with people about these issues, Israel loves Aliyah. They don't necessarily love Olim. Now, I don't totally agree with the way it's said. I like, it's a nice cliche, but I don't think people totally understand all the challenges that Olim face. In other words, when you sit with members of Knesset, there's not one who will look at you and say, I don't want to help Olim. So we go one by one and we meet with them and we present to them a lot of the challenges. And many of them are very surprised as they hear about some of the challenges that people are facing. So, what we did was we traveled around Israel to all different cities. We met with Olim. We heard, as they say in Israel, from the shetach, from the street, what are the issues that are facing people today. We created a full legislative and policy agenda that we're going to go through one by one simultaneously and try to address these issues. And we've created a coalition of members of Knesset from every single party. I'm talking now from within the Jewish parties. I don't mean this in a comical way. I don't expect the Arab parties to be working for Aliyah. They have agendas that they have to work on, but with the Jewish parties. And we've created this coalition. If you look at Yad L'Olim's 1-year anniversary video, you have people from Meretz all the way to religious Zionists. That's from far left secular to far right religious, praising the work of Yad L'Olim, because we've been working with every single one of them on these issues. It's been a little bit of a challenge because there hasn't been an Aliyah committee in the Knesset for political reasons, which I don't want to waste time explaining. Hopefully in the next Knesset, there will be one. So what we've done is we've been creative and we've found ways. So every single week, I'll look at the docket of the committees and, oh my goodness, in the health committee, they're talking about the lack of radiologists in Israel. So let me come there and talk about Olim radiologists and how there could be solutions to the problem, and try to bring and talk about making the process shorter for licensing. Any opportunity we have to talk about the issues of Olim, we use the committees for that. But most of the work happens behind the scenes, sitting with the members of Knesset, and they really do want to help Olim. And one of the things that we're going to do now during this election cycle, and this is our first opportunity as an organization to do this, is we're going to start authoring legislation now. We're going to work now during the election time to have legislation ready to go, to line up members of Knesset, so that the very first day that the next Knesset is sworn in, we will be able to get a sponsored with a bunch of members of Knesset from all parties behind it, and let's start the process of legislation, because laws take time to get through committee and go through the whole process. So let's be ready from day one to be able to do that. So we have created a coalition and we've raised the challenges in front of the members of Knesset, and we're making progress. The biggest issue that we have, and you as someone who lives in Israel are aware of this terrible, terrible word that you're met with, not with the members of Knesset, but with bureaucrats in the ministries. When you sit with them and you say, here's the problem, here's the solution, let's change it. And they say no. And you say, why not? And they say, kacha, because this is the way it is. I've been in this job for 30 years. I'm not in the mood to change anything. Kacha. So we're fighting against kacha. We're not accepting kacha. We're not going to stay quiet. If we believe that changes have to be made, we'll fight. A lot of the changes will take time. But I can tell you, after a year in this role, I was doing it for more than a year, but a year officially as Yad L'Olim, we have very much become that voice of Olim in the Knesset, their families, and really Jews around the world. It started certainly with Corona, but now it's continuing, with many other issues as well.
What are some of the challenges that you can share with us that Olim are facing? Not necessarily the obvious ones, but maybe some of the more surprising ones that you think people maybe aren't aware of at all, or if they are, they don't realize how big of a challenge it is.
The one that sticks out is certainly healthcare, navigating a whole new system, understanding how it works. The language barrier is a big one. You're going from countries around the world where there's just a very different system, and going to a system which is not only complicated, but not user-friendly for Olim at all. So that's a major, major priority of ours, to both get information to Olim about how to navigate the system when individuals need help, literally being accompanied through whatever the process is to do so, and to make sure that the system is there to be user-friendly to them as well. So that's number one. Number two is very much the process of transferring academic degrees, licenses, people who are so accomplished and so capable, who have to go through so many hoops, bureaucratic hoops, to be able to start working in Israel fully. That's a major challenge that we have to tackle. Education, especially in special education, making sure that children of Olim who are in special needs, who have special needs, can get the programs that they need, make sure that they're the child is placed in an appropriate school. So these are the kinds of things that we're dealing with, but we're dealing with it on a policy level and an individual level. There's just policy changes that we want to make, but there's also helping the individual through the bureaucracy. They are just many people, not all, but many are very overwhelmed by it. And just having someone who can kind of knock on the door and break down the barrier can help. The last thing I'll say, which is what surprised me, just because I'm not in that world, is the whole world of what's called Toshavim Chozrim or Ktinim Chozrim. People whose families made Aliyah a long time ago and then left, or they left when they were children, and they're trying to figure out what are their rights. They want to come back to Israel. They're passionate Zionists, and there's such a lack of information and lack of help to get them to the place where they understand what their rights are so they can make all the right decisions, or once they're here, getting those rights. So we've become very big advocates for them as well. And I want to emphasize, Yad L'Olim is helping people, Olim, we've helped Olim from 22 different countries. So it's not limited to English-speaking Olim. There's a whole world out there of Olim who are coming from countries, where they don't know where to turn to for assistance. And we're very much trying to make sure that we can be the address for that.
That's amazing. I want to get to a sensitive subject regarding the Arabs in Israel and obviously the Palestinians. One of the things, you talked about a Jewish state and democracy at the beginning of the episode, and there's sort of the Jewish angle of that, but then there's the real life angle of there's a significant portion of Arab Israeli citizens, and then we know obviously the Palestinian issue. And I'm just curious, not necessarily your own political opinions, but like how, as a former politician, as somebody who's very involved still at the policy level, how do we deal with this dissonance between a Jewish state and a democratic state? Because at a certain point, it doesn't take a academic demographer to understand that potentially one day, if we're a true democracy, well, one day the Arabs could stand up and say, it's our turn. And then all of a sudden Israel becomes Palestine. And so sure. I'm just curious about that analysis and how you see it.
Sure. So first of all, there were decades where the demographic issue was a real issue in Israel because the Arab population was having more children than the Jewish population. That has changed. And therefore, there's no sense of urgency of how can we be Jewish and democracy, because there's no feeling of that the Arab population will somehow overcome in numbers the Jewish population. So that urgency, so to speak, is not really on the table. But having said that, at the inauguration in 2013, so at the end of the inauguration for the Knesset, they played the national anthem, they played Hatikva, and I noticed that members of the Arab parties walked out beforehand, but Asawi Frej, a member of the Meretz party from the Arab population, stayed and stood quietly and respectfully. So I went over to him afterwards and I said, I want to learn more about this. Like, you stayed in, they walked out. What's this all about? So we made up to have a coffee, and it was life-changing for me. Sometimes you have coffees in the Knesset that really just, you have to learn more and understand more. And Asawi said to me very straightforward, he said, I have nothing against the national anthem of Israel. I'm sorry, that's not what he said. He said, I have nothing against a Jewish soul. He said, I just don't have one. I said, what? He said, the national anthem talks about 2,000 years of yearning of the Jewish soul, Nefesh Yehudi. I don't have that. So there's a disconnect for me. I'm not suggesting that we should change the national anthem at all. I believe that it should be what it is. But it really, really enlightened me to the challenge that an Arab Israeli feels of, oh my gosh, this is Jewish everywhere, and here I am, and I don't even have my space. So I went on this mission to try to understand Arab Israel, and I visited villages and I talked with people. And the way I see it, it's divided into basically three different thirds. One third that they're actually radical, anti-Israel, full in on the Palestinian side, just literal extremists, and that's scary that we have that in our midst. Another third that are somewhere in the middle, we'll play ball, we'll be in the Knesset. We wouldn't mind if the Jewish state disappeared, but we're not actively running against it. And then there's a third that will tell you behind closed doors, we'd rather live in Israel than any other country in the world. We have all the rights and opportunities, and we're thrilled to be here. And let's work together. And I really believe that we have to work very, very hard to empower that last third, because their voices aren't heard so much. Obviously, they live sometimes in fear of the far radical side that could turn to violence against them. But the more we invest in the Arab Israelis who want to be part of Israel, the more we avoid rhetoric that could distance them, by somehow generalizing and casting all Israeli Arabs in one group, the same way you can't do that for us Jews, you can't do that for those Arabs. And to really be sensitive to that and really start building up that sector, to start investing even more in terms of budgets for education and employment opportunities, and just give them all the feelings of equality and capitalism they could have, I do believe we'll be okay in the long run. I'm not going to get into my politics in terms of this past government overall, but I will say I'm happy that there was an attempt to bring an Arab party into the coalition. And by the way, anyone who's listening should not make any mistake about it. Netanyahu and Likud was going to do the same as well, if that would mean that they were going to have a government. And I think that it was a good opportunity to try that. I'm sad that I feel that some of the Arab MKs didn't participate in that effort the way they should have. The fact that they wouldn't vote for some basic laws that Israel has always passed, right wing or left wing, even if it related to Judea and Samaria, the West Bank. That was a mistake, because now you've, as the member of Knesset yelled out in the plenary, the experiment failed. It's a shame. We could have worked together, and you didn't play along with the rules. And the fact that we saw Palestinian flags waving in Israeli universities, like, what a mistake from a population that, yes, it might be difficult to be Arab in Israel. And yes, you're 20% of the population, but the Palestinian flag for Israel, for Israelis, represents people who pay terrorists to come to kill Jews in Israel. And all it does is deepen the gulf between those two sides. And it also pulls Israel further away from any desire to work together with them. So my hope is that there's some kind of a recovery period from this current government, and that somehow a constellation does develop where Arab leaders feel that they can work together with the Jewish population in Israel and be part of governments, etc. Having said all of that, I just want to make one last sentence, which I say in every speech I make to parliaments or college campuses. Every Knesset has Arab members of Knesset. Every Knesset has Arab deputy speakers of Knesset. Every Knesset has Arab chairmen of committees. We have Arab justices in the Supreme Court. There's full opportunity available for Israeli Arabs. And I just hope that that process of them recognizing that all these opportunities are available to them will continue. And the world will start learning that they shouldn't start using words like apartheid and the like when it comes to Israeli Arabs. I did not address the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in my answer, and I can if you want to ask me a question about that. But for me, within Israel, there is a way forward to try to close the gaps between the Jews and the Arabs.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I do want to move to, I know you were involved in education once upon a time in a very hands-on way. Now you still are, but more policy and things of that nature. I'm just thinking out loud with you, like, you talked about the issues of bureaucracy, and, people come from different areas of the world. They have different mindsets, different experiences. Some people know Hebrew, some people don't. I'm just curious, like, on a very macro level, education in almost every one of my episodes. I mean, this is episode, I think 39 or 40. Education always comes up, and it just always seems to be an issue. And I guess what I'm wondering is, like, you wrote this book, by the way, about Obama and Israel, and it's called Fact Over Fiction. You were telling me a little bit about it before we hit record. And, I just feel that, like, we see this a lot with the West, where the West goes in different parts of the world, and they take Western values and Western philosophies and Western mindsets, and they apply it to the rest of the world. And the fact is that the rest of the world doesn't think and act and behave like the West, and vice versa. When people come to Israel, people that you're helping on a day-to-day basis, in many cases, the things that they've been conditioned to think and learn, and the social norms and expectations and how things should be and how things were, are very different, and in some ways very startlingly different than what they've, especially if you're an older person in your 50s, 60s, or 70s. I mean, these things are deeply ingrained in you. I'm just wondering, like, how do we do a better job on the education front? You can say, well, we can teach everyone Hebrew, but Hebrew is one aspect. I mean, there's Israeli culture, and there's expectation setting, and there's all different types of, what I'll just call, in a very general term, education, What are some of the things that you're working on that front? Because to me, that could be a key in many ways to understanding the Middle East, understanding Israel, moving to Israel, being successful in your aliyah, et cetera, et cetera. What comes to mind when I say this kind of paint this kind of picture?
Certainly, I agree with it. That's first of all. I mean, I definitely agree that the change that you're going through in terms of culture and how things work is so startling, and you really have to be prepared for that. And I do believe that people, before they make aliyah, need to do their homework, need to be prepared, need to understand to whatever degree you can before you come here what you're coming into. We at Yad L'Olim are doing everything that we can in terms of providing resources and education. You just mentioned language. We just started something which we're going to hopefully have throughout the country called the Hebrew Speaking Club. What is that? The idea is a lot of people don't have time for Ulpan, or Ulpan doesn't really do it for them. The bottom line is that immersion in speaking is how you learn the language. That was my experience as well, for sure. And just the idea of sitting back in a comfortable place where there's no judgment, and the rule is when you walk through the door, if you're speaking Hebrew. And we have it in Sarona Tower in Tel Aviv at 6:30 on a Thursday night. There's some wine out and a beautiful view of the ocean, and it was really amazing to see the interactions between Olim and some native Israelis, and just interacting with each other. I believe that Olim have to work very hard to throw themselves into it and not fear what the other is thinking of them. It's very difficult because remember, a lot of people make aliyah are very successful people where they came from. They were leaders where they came from. They're movers and shakers. And now all of a sudden you feel so small when you're surrounded by this very different society. Throw yourself right into it and don't be afraid of it. And Israelis are okay with it. They like that. First of all, they love when there are Americans around or English speakers, that's for sure. But keep speaking Hebrew, throw yourself into the culture, don't shy away from the challenges, and you kind of learn by experience. Because as much as we can provide this course or that course or this webinar and that webinar, and those are helpful, and people have to be able to have all the information, ultimately it's up to the Oleh to be able to make it happen. And that takes courage, that takes a lot of commitment, and it takes a belief in yourself that you can get it done. One of the things that Yair Lapid told me early on in our relationship was when I was very nervous about my very, very American accent when I speak Hebrew. I don't try to sound Israeli, I sound as American as can be. And he said to me, "You're forgetting that Israel is a country of immigrants." And he pointed to Shimon Peres, who he said had a very strong accent for his entire life and didn't sound like a native Israeli. And we just have to be confident in ourselves and throw yourself forward. And I tell people, people say to me, how do I become a member of Knesset? And my story is obviously very different than most people's would be. But I say, just throw yourself into your local school board. Get involved in your local city council. Go to the meetings. Get involved in your community neighborhood watch, whatever. Just get involved. We need to get involved, and we can't be afraid of the cultural differences. It doesn't mean you have to start screaming like everybody else all the time. Okay, you don't have to have all the hand gestures down exactly right, but we can have a voice, and you can have a voice, and you just have to be prepared to do so. And I think that once people cross that line, that says the same way I was able to be a leader wherever I came from, I could do it in Israel. They will hear our voices and they will hear your voice, and you'll be able to succeed so much better. So yes, take courses about work, and we're offering a lot of those as well, and do the Hebrew language and all of that. But when it's all said and done, don't keep yourself in your narrow social group of Olim from the country that you came from. It's comfortable. It makes Aliyah easier, but it's not going to help your success in Israel go easier. And therefore, I tell everyone to do whatever they can to throw themselves into a much wider group of friends, a much wider community, and have the courage to take steps that you would have taken wherever you came from, and take those steps here as well.
Wow, amazing. Last question for you, Dov. Just take me through your vision, your 5 to 10 year vision, if you will, with Yad L'Olim, what you're planning, what you have in
Sure.
mind as you build out this great organization.
I definitely see Yad L'Olim developing into a place where we have divisions for many different populations of Olim. As much as I just said, let's break down those barriers, but there are specific needs that need to be addressed for different populations. So we would definitely want to be able to cater to those. Hopefully, we'll make real policy changes. We're working on some strong initiatives now, and my hope is that 5 years from now, we'll have less policy agenda issues to address, and then we'll just be available to help Olim with whatever processes are taking place. The one area where I really want things to shift to is in the Aliyah process. In other words, a lot of what I'm talking about now is helping people through bureaucratic issues once they're in Israel. And I believe we can address many of those policy issues. There's an entire shift that has to take place from the Israeli side when it comes to the process of Aliyah, the bureaucracy, the documents, the lack of transparency. A lot of people shy away from Aliyah very much because of that. And those are the areas where I think in like Shlav Bet, in the second stage, that's where we'll be addressing, the whole process of Aliyah, so that when a person does want to make Aliyah, from anywhere in the world, the entire process will be clear. They'll know exactly where their file stands. If they can't produce a certain document, there'll be a clear process for them to be exempt from that document. Let's get Jews here. Let's get people here. Aliyah is something that we want. We don't want it to be difficult. So that's kind of where we see it going on a policy level. And my hope is that we are inundated with hundreds of thousands of Olim to Israel who are asking for assistance, because that will mean that Jews are coming home. That will mean that we're continuing to play our role in the prophecies coming true of the ingathering of the exiles. And we in Yad L'Olim would like nothing more than to expand to make sure that more Olim can have success and really thrive in Israel.
Wow, Dov, you are a true champion. We are very lucky to have you as part of the Jewish people. Keep up the great work. And so thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me on.